My father taught me how to fix a roof, how to bait a hook, and how to tell when a storm was 3 days out by the way the cattle stood in the field. He never taught me how to forgive him. I didn't think I'd need to. Not until the morning did the county sheriff call to tell me my father had been found alive in a house that had been condemned for 11 years. The same house I grew up in, the same house I watched burned down on the news when I was 19 years old. Someone had been living in the ashes the whole time. And he'd been waiting for me to come home. A Red State Horror original presentation. The Weight of Ordinary Days. Set in Marrow Creek, Montana. Let's begin from Part 1. The Call. I was 34 years old, standing in my kitchen in Spokane with a dish towel over my shoulder, when the phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Montana area code. I almost let it go to voicemail. I almost let a lot of things go to voicemail that year. Is this Dale Pruitt's son? Nobody had called me that in 15 years. Not since I'd legally gone by my mother's maiden name. Not since I'd built a life 400 miles away from Marrow Creek with a job at a hardware distribution company and a one-bedroom apartment and a quiet that I'd worked very hard to earn. Who's calling? Sheriff Toby Reyes, Carver County. Sir, I need you to sit down. I didn't sit down. I stood at my counter and listened to a man I'd never met tell me that my father, who burned to death in a house fire on October 3, 2011, whose funeral I'd attended, and whose obituary I'd written myself at my mother's kitchen table while she cried into a roll of paper towels, had just been pulled out of the collapsed remains of that same house. Alive. Dehydrated. Confused. Asking for me by name. That's not possible, I said. He died. I buried an urn. Sir, I understand this is a shock, but we've got positive ID. Dental records confirm it. Your father has been alive this whole time. I laughed. I actually laughed, standing there in my kitchen, because it was the only sound my body knew how to make that wasn't screaming. Then who did we bury? There was a long pause on the line. The kind of pause where you can hear someone deciding how much truth a stranger on the phone can handle at 9 in the morning. We're still working that part out, Sheriff Reyes said. But your father's asking for you. Says he's got things he needs to say before he runs out of time to say them. I think you should come home. Part 2. Marrow Creek. I hadn't been back to Marrow Creek since the funeral. The drive took 6 hours, and I spent every one of them rehearsing things I'd say and then unsaying them, because nothing made sense to say to a dead man who wasn't dead. The town hadn't changed the way you'd expect a place to change in 15 years. The Conoco station was still there, still run by a Pearson, just a younger one now, a kid with his father's same lean, and his father's same way of leaning against the pump like the world wasn't in any hurry. The diner on Route 9 still had the hand-painted sign that said home cooking since 1962. The paint was cracked and faded, but the sentiment was the same. What had changed was the house. I drove past it before I went to the hospital. I don't know why. Maybe I needed to see it with my own eyes before I could believe any of what was happening. The Pruitt place sat at the end of Larkspur Road, half a mile back from the nearest neighbor, surrounded by the kind of overgrown field that swallows a property whole if nobody's there to push back against it. I remembered it as a white 2-story farmhouse with a wrap-around porch my father built himself the summer I turned 8. What stood there now was a blackened skeleton, charred beams reaching up out of collapsed flooring like ribs from something that had died slowly. 15 years of weather had softened the edges, grown moss into the burn scars, and let weeds climb through the floorboards. But the structure itself was still standing, barely, impossibly, exactly the way it had looked in the news footage I'd watched once, only once, before I made myself stop watching. Someone had been living inside that. I sat in my truck at the end of the gravel drive for almost 20 minutes before I could make myself put it in reverse and drive to the hospital instead. Part 3. My father. He looked smaller than I remembered. That's the cruelest thing about time. It doesn't just take years from you. It takes inches, takes weight off a man's shoulders until he looks like a thinner draft of himself. His hair had gone fully white. His hands, resting on top of the hospital blanket, were scarred in ways that made my stomach turn. Old burns, healed wrong, the kind of damage that comes from years without proper care. Cody. Nobody had called me Cody in 15 years either. I'd been to Cole and everyone in Spokane. I'd buried that name along with everything else from this town. Dad. The word came out before I decided to say it, like my body remembered the shape of it even though my mind had spent 15 years trying to forget. He started crying before I'd even sat down. Not the quiet, dignified crying you see in movies. Real crying. The kind that comes from somewhere too deep to control, his whole chest shaking with it. I thought you weren't going to come, he said. I told myself if you didn't come, I'd understand. God knows I'd understand. Dad, what happened? They told me you died. I went to your funeral. I held an urn with your name on it. He looked away from me, out the window at the gray Montana sky, and for a long moment I thought he wasn't going to answer at all. That wasn't me in that urn, Cody. That was Hollis Beaumont. The name meant nothing to me. I waited. You remember the Beaumont place? Out past the Sandersons? Hollis worked the rigs up in Williston and came home maybe twice a year. Didn't have anybody left. Wife passed, kids moved off, no family that'd come looking. He used to come by sometimes, help me with the fence line, and have a beer on the porch. My father's hands were shaking against the blanket. The night of the fire, he was at the house. We'd been drinking, talking about your mother, about you leaving, about how I'd ruined everything that mattered to me. I don't remember exactly how the fire started. I've spent 15 years trying to remember, and I can't. But I remember waking up outside, in the field, and the house already going up, and Hollis. He stopped. His jaw worked like he was chewing on something that wouldn't go down. Hollis didn't make it out. And when the fire marshal came through after going through what was left, they found remains, and everybody just assumed. Nobody comes looking for Hollis. Nobody to ask questions. And I let them assume. I let your mother bury a stranger thinking it was me, because I was a coward, Cody, and I didn't know how to face what I'd become. I sat very still in that hospital chair. I felt something cracking open in my chest that I'd spent a decade and a half cementing shut. You let us bury him. You let me believe my father was dead for 15 years, and you were just, living in the burned-down house this whole time. Not the whole time. I left for a few years, worked oil patches up in Alberta, and tried to be somebody else somewhere else. But I kept coming back. I didn't have anywhere else that felt like mine. I'd sleep in the part of the house that didn't burn all the way through. The root cellar held most of it. I told myself I'd write you a letter eventually. Tell you the truth eventually. His voice broke. Eventually turned into 15 years, Cody. I don't have an excuse that's good enough. I know that. Part 4. What he owed me. I didn't say anything for a long time. I just sat there looking at this man. My father, alive, impossibly alive, and feeling something I didn't have a clean name for. No relief, not quite anger either, though there was plenty of that mixed in. Something more like grief for a different kind of loss. I had spent 15 years mourning a man who wasn't dead, and now I had to figure out how to be angry at a man I'd already finished grieving. You know what the worst part of losing you was? I said. It wasn't even the funeral. It was the year after. Mom couldn't get out of bed most mornings. I was 19, working the night shift at the feed store, trying to hold both of us together because you weren't there to do it. I learned how to be a man by watching you not be one anymore, by you being gone. I know, do you? Because you don't get to just come back from the dead and say, I know, like that settles something. It doesn't settle anything. I'm not asking it to. He reached toward me, and I let him take my hand even though every part of my being told me not to. His grip was weaker than I remembered, the skin loose over old burn scars. I'm asking for the chance to say the things I should have said before that fire ever happened. Before I drank myself into a man your mother couldn't live with. Before I made you grow up faster than any boy should have to. Mom's gone too, you know. 3 years now. Cancer. She never knew any of this. She died thinking you were ashes in a box on my shelf. My father's face did something I'd never seen it do before. Not in childhood. Not in any memory I had of him. It collapsed. Genuinely collapsed. Like a building giving way floor by floor. She's gone, Dad. And you weren't there. You could have been there. You could have told the truth at any point in 15 years and been there for her, for me, for any of it. And you chose to hide in a burned-down house instead. Before I tell you what happened next, and what I decided to do about a man who'd let me bury a stranger and grieve alive for 15 years, if you're feeling this story the way I felt living it, hit subscribe. These are the kinds of stories that don't always have clean answers, and I think that's exactly why they're worth telling. And I want to know, tell me in the comments, what you would have done in that hospital room. Would you have walked out? Would you have stayed? Now, back to Marrow Creek. Part 5. The Root Cellar. I went back to the house that evening, after I left the hospital, after I sat in my truck in the parking lot for an hour, just breathing. I don't know what I was looking for. Maybe proof. Maybe just a place to be angry where nobody could see me do it. The Root Cellar door was where he said it would be. A slab of rusted metal, half buried under collapsed framing. But it gave way when I pulled. Stairs led down into a space that still smelled like smoke after 15 years, like the fire had soaked permanently into the stone. He'd been living down there. A cot, a kerosene lamp, a milk crate full of things that stopped my breath when I understood what they were. Photographs of me, newspaper clippings, my high school graduation, written up in the Carver County Gazette because I'd gotten a scholarship. Nobody expected a Pruitt boy to get it. A birthday card I'd sent my mother years ago somehow ended up here, her handwriting on the envelope. He'd been watching from a distance, not close enough to face us, close enough to ache. There was a notebook, too, the pages soft and water-damaged, filled with his handwriting. Letters he'd started and never finished, never sent. Dear Cody. Dear Cody. Dear Cody. Dozens of them, all starting the same way, none of them ever getting past the first paragraph before the writing just stopped, as they ran out of courage at the same place every single time. I sat on the dirt floor of that root cellar, and I read every unfinished letter my father had written to me over 15 years. And somewhere in the middle of reading them, I realized I was crying so hard I couldn't see the words anymore. He hadn't been hiding from me because he didn't care. He'd been hiding because he cared too much to face what he'd cost me, and that's a different kind of cowardice, the kind that comes from love gone wrong instead of love gone absent. It didn't excuse 15 years. It didn't bring my mother back or give me back the 19-year-old version of myself who needed a father and didn't have one. But it changed something in me, sitting in the dark in that root cellar with a stack of letters that never got sent. Part 6. Going back. I went back to the hospital the next morning. My father was awake, watching the door the way I imagine he'd been watching it every morning for 15 years, waiting for someone who never came. I sat down. I put the notebook of unfinished letters on the blanket between us. You don't have to read them, he said quietly. I know how it looks. I already read them. All of them. He closed his eyes. I'm not going to tell you it's okay, I said. Because it's not. You took 15 years from me that I'm never getting back. And you took my mother's last years from her too, and there's no version of this conversation where that becomes all right. I know, but I read every one of those letters, Dad. And I saw a man who loved his son so much he couldn't stand what he'd become in front of him. That's nothing. That's not an excuse. But it's nothing. We sat there for a long time, the two of us, in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic instead of smoke. Outside the window, the Montana sky had taken on the particular gray it takes right before snow. I don't know how to be your son again, I told him honestly. I don't know how any of this works now. Then we figure it out slowly, he said. However long it takes. I got nothing but time now, Cody. Spent 15 years wasting it. I'd like to spend whatever's left doing it right, if you'll let me. It's been 8 months since that hospital room. My father lives in an assisted facility in Carver County now. His body never fully recovered from 15 years of hard living in a half-burned house. And some things just don't heal right no matter how much time you give them. I drive up from Spokane every third weekend. We don't talk about the fire much. We talk about fishing, about the Pearson kid who's taking over the Conoco station, about small, ordinary things that fathers and sons are supposed to get to talk about. Last month, we drove out to Larkspur Road together. The county finally tore down what was left of the house. Too dangerous to leave standing, they said, after the story got out and the news vans showed up asking questions about the man who came back from the dead. We stood at the edge of that empty field together, my father leaning heavily on a cane, me standing close enough to catch him if he needed catching. I used to think this place was the only thing keeping me alive, he said. Turns out it was the thing keeping me from living. I think about Hollis Beaumont sometimes. A man with no family left to claim him, buried under a name that wasn't his. In a grave my mother visited every Sunday for 15 years, thinking she was grieving her husband. We had his name corrected on the headstone this spring. It felt like the least anyone could do for a man who deserved better than being forgotten twice. My father's letters, all those unfinished Dear Cody, sit on my bookshelf now, in the same spot where his urn used to sit. Not because I've forgiven everything. I don't know if forgiveness is even the right word for what happened between us. But every third weekend I drive 6 hours to sit with a man who spent 15 years too ashamed to finish a sentence. And I let him finish it now, one ordinary Saturday at a time. Because some men don't burn down in a single night. Some of them just take a decade and a half to stop hiding in the ashes of who they used to be. This is Red State Horror. I'll see you next Thursday. Listen in the dark.